Hi, Greens. I have a little short video here I wanted to do just to talk about how money is created in the system that we have today and what we should do about that. And just a short piece on why. So let me begin by sharing my slideshow here. And here we go. I wanted to make a little corrective on what I had said last time about the 2008 financial crisis. And of course it was because banks were lending too much and blew this big bubble, right? But of course the crash occurred when the banks stopped lending after that period of blowing the bubble up. And that's what brings it down. And that's what caused the crash. So, that was the detail that I wanted to add to it. And of course, our response was to do monetary reform, just as economists all over the world had wanted to do after the Great Depression occurred, because the banks had intentionally crashed the economy in order to transfer enormous wealth up to themselves. Let's look at this word economy just briefly. Eco means house, right? It's a Greek word, refers to house. Also in the greater sense, the world, our planet that we live on. And nomi equals the rules. Nomi refers to rules. So it's the house rules that we're talking about when we talk about the economy. And some of those house rules are regarding the money, so our monetary policy. And as Aristotle pointed out, money exists not by nature, but by law. And what he was pointing out was because gold and other precious metals were common in those days, being used as money. But they weren't money unless law made them money, unless the king said this is money and put a stamp on it and says this is money. Otherwise, you're just trading economy, a commodity, right? Just a little detail there. And so let's look at my diagram for an economy here. We have in the middle here, we have the exchange of goods and services, right? And so that's what an economy is, an exchange of goods, services, and it's facilitated by money. So it's an exchange of money for goods and services is what the economy basically is. So money plays a very important role in it. We can't live without it hardly these days. That's the way the economy is. You starve without housing and food and stuff like that without some money. And that's the problem. There's not enough money. And an economy depends on our earth, as a famous senator once noted. The economy is really a subset of our ecology, and not the other way around. And so everything that for goods and services, our food, everything comes from the earth. And of course, it gets energy from the sun. And so that's where everything comes from for our economy, all the materials that are required to have an economy at all. And my red circle there is referring to the metabolic rift. Marx had referred to this because he was concerned that we were taking food from the soil, but we weren't returning our wastes back to the soil, so that it's, we restore the carbon in the soil and the fertility in the soil, the life in the soil, which is very important because fertility is a direct relationship to the amount of life in your soil. And soil is made up by trillions of microorganisms and of all kinds, from bacteria and fungi and nematodes, etc. And so that metabolic rift, he was, there was a disconnect between people and their food and what's required of the earth for growing our food. And that's something that we would like to eliminate, is that rift. Now, who creates money? Well, the government can create money, and the banks can create credit, which we use for money. So how does the government create money? Well, for one thing, the government via the U.S. Mint creates the coins for the economy. And it can make 4 quarters for about 11 cents each, which makes, and then it sells them, it sells that coinage to the banks for their face value. And so if it costs us, 48 cents or so for 4 quarters to make $1, then we get 56 cents of profit coming back from the banks. That's called seigniorage, that profit over the cost of production and face value of the money. And so it's the face value of money minus the cost of production. That's seigniorage, and it's a profit off of a benefit of the issuer of money. Okay, and because just creating it doesn't get you anywhere until it's issued. Now, money creation of the bills. Now, the Federal Bureau of Engraving and Printing prints the bills. And the figures here are wrong because if you look at the 2017 financial report of the U.S. Treasury, it actually cost a nickel per bill to print. And I should correct that and will for future reference. But so it creates each bill for a nickel. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's $1 or a $100 bill. It only costs a nickel to produce. But we sell those bills to our government just for cost of production. We get no seigniorage on any of that, which would be a significant amount because it's a lot more bills than there are coins, obviously. And so we get no benefit. The government gets no benefit from printing that. Because we just sell it for cost, and it's $1,000 per. What is it? I don't remember. It's in the Treasury report. I suggest you take a look at the Treasury report. Find interesting things about that. The banking system gets the seigniorage from our paper money when they issue it for cash and checks, for instance. So if you come in, cash a check for $1 and they give you $1, they just made 95 cents off of that, issuing that money. And so as they issue the cash, they reap the seigniorage on that money. But an interesting point is all the cash in the system, and many people don't realize this, but all the cash in our entire money supply in our nation and the world too is only about 3%. There's only about 3% that's cash money. Most of it is electronic money or account money, we call it. And account money is created when a bank creates a loan. When they make a loan, they create the money. That just keystrokes, the numbers go up in their computer. They've created that money that they're lending you, and at interest. And the interesting thing is, when they create that loan, they only create the principal. They don't create the money for the interest. It's just the principal, right? So, so where does the interest money come from? Well, since all the money 97% of it is created by banks, then the money to pay that interest has to come from someone else's principal, right? Someone else's loan. So the economy is constantly having to produce more loans to stay ahead of those debt payments. Because if it doesn't, then it crashes and we have a recession. And that's what happens. And so that's called a fractional reserve system. Now, there's no fraction involved necessarily, although there was at one time. And I think it's still on the books and still imposed on the smaller banks. The big banks can get away with a lot more. But there is a 10% reserve requirement that has been standing since 1913. And all account money is created by the banks when they make a loan or buy securities. So when the government wants to borrow money, it sells securities. It sells bonds. And these are bought by the banks who create money to buy those from us. So all the money is created by the banks, pretty much, except for the cash, and the only real money issued by government is the coins, which is a very tiny fraction of the money supply. So in a private money system, it should be noted that money is issued for personal gain because it's a private business, for-profit business. And so money issued for personal gain as interest-bearing debt, which is usury, because a usury is the abuse of monetary authority for personal gain. That's what it's about. That's what Jesus was pissed off about when he overturned the tables, right, in the temple. And it's what philosophers have railed against for centuries. It's what all the religions banned usury for a long time. Today, with the dominance of bank money, they've kind of backed off of their ban of usury, all except one religion, and that's Islam, who still bans usury, although, still those wealthy Arabs who may claim to be Muslim, but are practicing usury and participating in usury. And this creates the economics of greed, which we have today, obviously, in the world. And it systematically causes predatory competition because people are always trying to pay the debt, right? And when only the principal is created, you notice how on, say, a car loan, when you're when they break it down, that you pay the interest, the percentage of your payment that you pay. Most of it is interest at first, because the banks want their money first. And the principal is just a small amount on the principal. And gradually, as you pay all of that interest, then you start paying on the principal. Banks want their money first. And this creates endless growth, requirement for endless growth. Of course, you can't have endless growth. That's impossible. But it creates short-term thinking as well, which, not being able to think past the next quarter, hardly. There have been examples of money systems in the world that last for a very short time, and that we will talk about in another video, that actually encourages long-term thinking, which is what we need to take care of our earth. We need to have long-term thinking, like the 7 generations, like our indigenous ancestors. And it's a systematic concentration of wealth. The private money system is a systematic concentration of wealth. Well, that's why they do it, right? It's a for-profit thing. So it's a systematic concentration of wealth, and that wealth keeps going to the top through interest and compound interest just keeps going up to the top and creates a mountain of debt for us to live with and deal with. And there's much more debt in the world than there is money to pay that debt. And so it's becoming a problem, and people like Michael Hudson are talking about jubilees now, and Steve Keen talking about jubilees to erase the debt. But that doesn't change the system. That just allows that system to continue concentrating wealth to the top by issuing money as debt. And so Greens proposed that we change that system to one where money is not issued as debt, but issued as a public asset, a permanently circulating exchange medium. Because when you pay off a loan, that principal is destroyed. That money is extinguished. So when you pay on your principal of your loan in the bank computer, that number goes down. The principal keeps going down until it's gone. And so that's less money in the economy. Whereas in a public money system, it's different. That money's not destroyed. Because it's not created by the banks, so not destroyed by the banks. And so when banks lend money, it would only be publicly created money and therefore would not be destroyed. It would simply go back into the bank for the bank to lend out again and circulate. In a public money system, money is issued as an asset, as a public asset. Now, you get lots of argument from economists and people out there who don't understand this because it's rarely ever happened. I mean, how long in the history of humankind, in Western civilization rather, have we not lived under the wealthiest ruling us? That's a hallmark of Western civilization, right? The wealthy rule the people. And it's been that way from pretty much the beginning of civilization, with a very few brief instances, which I told you about in the previous video. But what public money will do is create an economics of care. It has completely different psychological consequences than what usury has. And of course, that's why the religions were opposed to it, was the psychological consequences it has on people, on their behavior and on their spirit, and on the physical economy. But in an economics of care, sharing would be encouraged. Regenerative growth is encouraged. Broad-based prosperity is achieved. 100% unemployment. And of course, everybody can't be doing jobs. That's why a job guarantee doesn't make sense, because a lot of times you're taking care of a loved one. Well, that's a job you should get paid for, because you're providing a service. And so in the current system, it's all profit oriented. And so, it's really wrong. And there's no mountain of debt in a public money system. There's another aspect to government spending, and that relates to cost. In the private money system, cost is a penalty. It's money out of your pocket that must be paid either through taxes or through a loan from a private commercial bank that creates the money by fiat and lends it to us, which must be paid back with interest, a debt. And so basically we rent our money from the private banking system. And that goes for individuals, households, businesses, corporations, and the government. Everybody gets their money from the private banking system. In a public money system, cost is not a matter of money, because the government can create as much money as it wants under a public money system, because they are the creator of money. And so the limitations to that are not on the amount of money. It's not that cost. It's the resources. It's whether or not we have the skills and the know-how and the labor and materials necessary to do something. And if we do, if it is physically possible and socially desirable, then it's financially feasible. And so money can then be issued for that if those factors are met. And what that will do is reconnect our economy to the ecology and give us what you might call a resource-based economy, because cost for government spending would be based on resources, and government would be the sole issuer of money, because it would stop the banks from creating money as they do today, which is usury. So it would end the usury and create a public money system where our elected representatives would do the spending that we require to have a quality of life that we can all enjoy. The government doesn't need to get into the banking business to do this. We just need to make the rules, the House rules. And but banks need to get out of the governing business, and that's what monetary reform is about, is getting banks out of that position of being able to influence government, because we just had a government shutdown. And why is that? Well, because we couldn't borrow the money to do it. And that doesn't make sense. Government should be able to create the money, and there should be no government shutdown. That doesn't make any sense. So there's 3 necessary reforms. I want to reiterate what those are, and that is, it's in the Green Party platform. It was also proposed during the Great Depression, and it also was proposed by Dennis Kucinich in the NEED Act, which so we already have legislation to do this, right? We already have legislation there in Congress that's been vetted by the lawyers. So to integrate it into the structure of law that we have, and so we should do it. And so the first thing is the Fed becomes part of the government, and that's precisely what most people mistakenly believe, but it's not true. Okay, the Fed's not part of the government, but we should make it part of our government. And the bank creation of money as debt is decisively stopped. Banks will only loan money that already exists. In other words, that was created by the government and deposited by the people into the bank. And they have these deposits in savings accounts that people put there for the bank to invest and pay them interest on their savings. And so that's how the system works. People believe the system works that way. Many people do. It works that way now, but it does not, and it should. And then the federal government creates the money into existence and spends it to the nation on people's needs. And this is what a lot of people believe happens, but it does not happen now. And that's what our monetary reform legislation would do, is change that. Now, these 3 reforms must be done at once because well, we learn from history. And so here's what we've learned. The Bank of England was nationalized in 1946 after the war. That's basically the Bank of England was kind of like the head of the international banking community. And that head moved to New York after World War II, actually during World War II. And so the Bank of England was nationalized and made a public bank. And that's kind of a good thing, in that the 3% of cash that they issue, they get all the seigniorage on their cash. More than the coins, they get the seigniorage on the paper too. So it's a little benefit. However, because they didn't stop private banks from creating money, 97% of the UK's money is still created by the banks. And so thus they dominate monetary policy. And then on the next step here, look at Jackson and Van Buren revoked the second bank of the U.S.'s charter. In other words, they stopped most bank-created money at the time, which is reform number 2. But because they didn't understand the true nature of money, they thought gold was going to take care of the business, and it did not, and plunged the nation into a deep depression. And until they figured out a way to start getting some money back into the economy. Unfortunately, they did not adopt a public money system. They just gave it back to the banks and said, okay, you guys keep issuing money, our money. We can keep renting it from you. And then Lincoln, he issued greenbacks. Well, that was public money that was issued, and as an asset, so it wasn't required to be paid back, and as a debt. And but the problem was the bank creation of money wasn't stopped, and so the bankers methodically got the upper hand and quashed the greenbacks. And there is a terrific book that I have called, what was it? Yeah. The 7 Financial Conspiracies Which Have Enslaved the American People. This was written by Sarah Emery back in, I believe it was in the, when was it? Back in the 20s, I believe. And, or no, it was in 1880s. 1880s. Yeah, 1894. Wow, that's the same year Coxey's Army had their big march and protest on D.C. because they wanted more greenbacks spent into the economy for, public services. But anyway, she tells about how the greenbacks were getting out of circulation. It took a long time to do because they were permanent money. They just kept circulating. And so with the banks got a hold of them, they kept them. They didn't send them back out into the economy. And they got Congress, and of course Congress, how it tends to bend over for bribes, lobbying. And they got Congress to pass a law that said that the greenbacks were redeemable in gold, trying to get the people to trade their greenbacks in for gold. Well, that failed because the people didn't want to do that. They understood money well enough to know that this was a very convenient exchange medium, whereas gold was not. So our Green Party platform has those 3 important reforms. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to greensformonetaryreform.org and read more about how that system works, how the solution to the problem would work, and what the transition would be like, because there obviously would be a transition from one to the other. And so there's information there about how that transformation would work. And again, we're not alone in this. There's more than 30 countries also pushing for monetary reform in their respective nations. And this is coming to a head. It's got to happen pretty much. Either that or we become under the rule of one world government, that uses military and violence to keep everybody in line so that the few can have their way with us. As Thomas Paine said at the end of the Revolutionary War, when they thought they were going to be able to issue their own money, he said, we have won the power, have it in our power to begin the world over again. And that's what he was referring to, was the fact that if the United States were able to issue its own money, that we could build an economy that would be the envy of the world, that would make other countries want to do the same. Prosperous for all the people. No poverty whatsoever, because there would not be any reason for having any poverty in the society. So that's the short story of it. And please, in the comment section, if you have any questions, please ask those questions, and I want to do a video that addresses all your questions. Thank you very much, and have a good day.